Experimentation on embryos to be doubled from 14 to 28 days.
Simon Fischel believes it would improve our understanding of disease, but some groups have raised concerns about that suggestion. Matthew Hill reports.
The birth of Louise Brown, the world's first IVF baby in Oldham in 1978, changed reproduction forever. At the time, scientists were accused of playing God by experimenting on human embryos. But eventually a law was brought in to allow controlled IVF and research on human embryos for up to 14 days. Scientists at Cambridge University have recently cultured embryos for 13 days, and they believe they could make discoveries about genetic disease and why miscarriages happen if the law changes.
There were people that condemned mum and dad for having the treatment and having me. So anything, as I said, that can help create a family, I think is brilliant. It's just fantastic that there are people out there trying to help people have a family.
The BBC has commissioned the first survey of its kind into this question. 48% supported increasing the limit up to 28 days, 19% wanted to keep the present limit of 14 days, and 10% wanted a total ban. 1 in 4 didn't know. The scientist who worked on the same team that created the world's first IVF baby has called on the government to hold an inquiry into extending the rule.
I think the benefits of doing this research are that specifically during that period of time, which we can't get access to at the moment, many things happen and go wrong, and we can learn an awful lot from what goes wrong. For example, miscarriage. It will happen and it will start to be caused around that period of time. There are so many things in relation to some cancers that almost begin their problems at that very stage.
However, religious, moral and ethical objections have also been raised.
An embryo is a person with the rights of a person. It's going to grow into a person, and it wouldn't become a human if it weren't a human already. So even though great benefits can come, we consider that that embryo has rights which cannot be turned over.
Dee has had several miscarriages.
If there were research that could give insights into why that happens, that could stop that. I mean, if 1 in 4 people experience miscarriage, if it reduced that number, it's really important.
For Dee and many women like her, the need to shed light on why this might be happening is the most important thing. Matthew Hill, BBC News.
Let's talk about this a bit more with Alison Campbell, Group Director of Embryology at the Private Fertility Clinic, and Anthony McCarthy from the Society of Protection of Unborn Children. Good morning to you both. Thank you for your time to come in and discuss this with us as well. Alison, is it quite clear the benefits for you on extending the 14-day rule?
Yes, absolutely.
And what would they be?
Well, it's really to gain more insight into the developmental patterns of the human embryo and into human development per se. So I think there are benefits primarily for miscarriage patients in the first instance, yes. And going beyond that for investigating and being able to study tumour development, different abnormalities of development. So generally huge benefits.
So Anthony, if there are benefits for example, women suffering from miscarriages, can you see a benefit to extending it from 14 to 28 days?
I can't really. I mean, first of all, the 14-day limit was always an arbitrary limit. It was set in 1990, and at that time we were told that there would be very strict controls on all sorts of things. Things we were told would never happen have, things like cloning, human-animal hybrids, a whole range of things, 3-parent embryos, another one. So I think there's a continual push to, in effect, actually dehumanize the embryo in order to make creation and destruction of embryos more and more available. And we have to ask morally, you know, should we be doing that? Is that a way of seriously treating human beings?
Well, what we need to remember is that these embryos are not being created specifically for research. So where I work at Care Fertility, we have the opportunity, we give it to those patients. They have extra embryos which would otherwise be discarded. They don't need them or they can't use them. So they're using informed consent to donate these embryos for specific licensed research.
So what do you, specifically on those moral concerns, do you think they're not relevant then?
Of course, moral concerns are relevant. It's a very important and sensitive debate. But I think we can see that the public are engaged with this. It's something that everybody needs to be involved in.
If I can just take you back, Anthony, to what, and this is what Mary Warnock, who was originally involved in the decision about the 14 days, and what she said, before 14 days, it's absolutely certain, beyond any doubt whatsoever, there are no beginnings of a spinal cord in an embryo. That means that whatever is done to the embryo during that period, it cannot be feeling anything. So you talked about a sort of arbitrary, but, you know, she's talking about very specific, something very specific that's going on.
Well, actually, she herself said that this ultimately was an arbitrary limit. So what's being said there is actually not very precise or scientific. What we're talking about is a new human being from conception. That's the only sensible way in which to understand the nature of the embryo. And we're told again and again that we need to respect the embryo, but we actually see mass production, quality control, spare embryos, embryos that we don't need. These are young human beings. We wouldn't talk that way about beings, human beings that were somewhat older, and yet when we talk about the new human being, the person, what we see is an undermining of that. They are created through a production process and they are treated as products, the whole language surrounding them. Now, this extension of the limit is another way of opening further this. And what we've seen, actually, is a push for no limits. What we've also seen is no cures from the embryo experimentation.
Come back on that, Alison.
Well, I'd certainly say there are strict limits. They're not treated as a commodity. Embryos, I'm a fertility specialist. We treat them with respect. They have the potential, of course, to become a human being. But most of them don't make it. Most of them are not viable. And they are a product of the fertility treatment, which in many cases will not be used for anything else.
Well, you say that they're treated with respect, but they are destroyed in their hundreds of thousands, and they are referred to as spare or supernumerary. Now, a lot of IVF parents actually feel a relationship with embryos, but they're not being treated as though they are the children of parents.
Anthony, just take about, if we just look at it, you know, from your point of view, are you talking, you know, because you have a problem, obviously, with the doubling of it. Do you have a problem with it just per se?
Indeed, I'm not going to pretend that the 14-day limit is a good thing. I think that there should be a protection for all human life from conception. However, I do think, obviously, if you have a bad policy in place, it can be made worse, and I think this is an attempt to do so.
Alison, Louise mentioned Baroness Warnock, and she herself who created that 14-day rule. She says that scientists should try and carry out more research within those days rather than trying to extend it. Isn't that a sensible suggestion?
Yeah, I think we need to do both things. We need to research on the pre-implantation phase, which is what we are doing, but we also need to start looking beyond that, because these researchers in Cambridge, who we have worked with very closely, can see now we can culture embryos for longer. So with very careful control, I think we do absolutely need to look beyond. But at the moment, of course, yes, we are researching pre-implantation, so before 13 days.
OK, Alison Campbell, thank you very much. Also, Anthony McCarthy, thank you both. Thank you.
Good to talk to you both. Thank you for that. Right, let's get an update on the weather from Carol. She's told us it's a quiet week. But I'm sure there's something happening, Carol. Morning.
Thank you. Yes, there is something happening, Dan, but it is a quiet week nonetheless. If I start off by telling you about the temperatures that we currently have. In Stornoway already it is 11 Celsius. Belfast we're looking at 8. Cardiff 6. Birmingham 4, but in the southeast temperatures are much lower, and that is because we've got clear skies. There's also some patchy frost and some patchy fog around. Now in the south we're pulling in the cold continental air behind this cold front, the one represented with the triangles, whereas in the north behind the warm front, the one with the semicircular red on it, well, we've got the milder air, hence 11s, 10s, 9s across parts of Northern Ireland and Scotland in particular.